Hey everyone, this is Thomas from Springfield Daily. We are in the new studio in the downtown Innovate Springfield Incubator in wonderful downtown Springfield. My guest today is Dr. Robert Marshall, one of the many Democratic candidates for governor. Thank you so much for being here. So please tell me a little bit about yourself and why you're running for governor.
Well, I'd like to thank you for having me here. I live in Burr Ridge, which is one of the suburbs of Chicago. I'm a physician. I work for Oak Forest Hospital, which is one of the Cook County hospitals. I live in Burr Ridge. I'm a father of four. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I have an office in Berwyn, which is one of the suburbs of Chicago. I have a radiology office there. Been there 34 years. So that makes me a small businessman as well as a physician. So I'm familiar with a lot of the problems that small businessmen have. And I decided to run in this race because I just was following the race and I really wasn't satisfied with a lot of the candidates. Actually, there was more before, but most of the candidates are really in favor of a lot of really large tax increases, which I am against. My platform is you can divide it into three parts. Taxes in general. I'm opposed to any increase in tax rates. So I'm opposed to a graduated income tax or further increase in the flat income tax. I'm opposed to other state taxes like gasoline and tobacco and alcohol and things like that. I was one of the first ones, I think I was the only one to come out and speak against the Cook County soda tax. I don't know if you were familiar with that down here, but we did have a big tax on soda drinks and it was very unpopular and they got rid of it. So I'm the only candidate who spoke out against that. So taxes are number one issue with everybody. It always is, So that's number one with me. Number two is legalizing marijuana throughout the state of Illinois. And that'll be just like they have in Colorado or California. It'll create a whole new industry, probably 40,000 jobs in this state, growing it, transporting, selling it, and regulating all those things. It'll create an enormous number of jobs and create an enormous amount of new revenue for the state. And another new revenue is casino gambling for Chicago. That's another big new source of revenue that we're not tapping. And this will be casino gambling mainly for the tourists who come in there, the visitors. There's 55 million tourists or visitors who come into Chicago every year. And these are not poor people. These are pretty well-heeled, well-dressed people, and they can afford a little diversion with the casino gambling. So that's two big sources of money that we're not tapping. And the third part of my platform is this one that you mentioned. That's to do something really radical with the state of Illinois, and that's to divide it up into smaller states. And at the present time, I'm thinking about dividing the state of Illinois into three brand new states. And I don't know if you can project an image or not, but I have a map of it here. We can look at that eventually. The three states would be Chicago. The city of Chicago would be a state all by itself with its own governor and constitution and everything, The suburbs of Chicago, going all the way out to the Mississippi River, would be the second state, and the third state would be everything south of Route 80. So you would be living in this new state. Your boundary would go only up to Route 80. You would not be associated with Chicago anymore. You wouldn't be asked to bail it out. You wouldn't be bossed around by Chicago anymore. Mike Madigan would go back to Chicago, and then you'd get your own people down here, your own governor, your own two senators, your own everything, and you'd start all over with a brand new state. And I have a map here if you would like to look at it, if you could see it.
I would love to see that one.
How should we show that? Can we see
If we put that up, we can definitely impose it over late. We can drop it in as a graphic later.
All right.
But we should definitely be able to see that in the shot.
Well, there it is. The Chicago's up in the corner. That's number one. Number two, state number two is the suburbs. going down to Route 80.
Oh, so State 1 is actually a very small area.
Yeah, but they have a lot of people there though. It's, it's divided up by population to a large extent.
Well, so similar actually to, say, Berlin or Hamburg in Germany, where cities really are their own states.
So why not? I mean, the thing is, they have a gigantic number of people. And also, why should the people of Chicago be concerned about farming issues, or like Roundup, or some farming issues? Why should they be concerned about that? And then vice versa. Why should the farmers and people down here be concerned about gangs and things in Chicago? I mean, so the third state, which is your state, is everything south of Route 80. So you've got everything all set up. You've got your capital, all your university system, hospitals, highways. You're all set up to go, really. And right now, in this state, you've got 20%, a small number of politicians representing 20% of the state, bossing around all the rest of the state. Why don't you have your own leaders down here? So that's what I'm proposing. So now the question is, can it be done? Can it be done? And it hasn't been done before. Well, yeah, it can be done. It's in the U.S. Constitution. A state cannot do this by itself. You cannot break off by yourself and form your own state. The whole state has to propose a plan to divide the state up, and it has to be approved by the state legislature. 50% plus one. And then it has to be approved by Congress in Washington, 50% plus one. So this is more doable than an amendment. And, any amendment requires 60% or 2/3 or 3/4 of the state or whatever. It's very hard to get an amendment to a constitution. But this is more doable because it's only 50% plus one. And the other thing is, well, has it been done before? Yeah, West Virginia. 150 years ago, West Virginia used to be part of Virginia. They broke up, and they're still separate today. So it has been done.
And so I guess there are some logistical questions that I have with that. Obviously, Illinois is not the only state to be talking about dividing up. California has floated several proposals recently. But I guess the logistics and the number one problem in the state is, of course, the pension debt, which represents some $130 billion in unfunded liabilities, not counting the projected costs. Where does that come in? Where does that come into this?
Well, this is one thing. In my opinion, those pensions are not underfunded or unfunded. They're overpromised. These are extremely generous pensions that we've been clocked into over the years. I mean, you've got over 100,000 people with pensions over $50,000, and the average income is $50,000 to $60,000. Throughout the state. You've got 17,000 people who have pensions over $100,000. It's $7 to $8 billion a year, and their cost of living is 3% or whatever it is. So 10 years from now, it's going to be much, much bigger. I mean, we have to get to a situation where we can refinance or renegotiate those pensions. We have to renegotiate the ones that we have now downward, so they're more manageable. And this plan here does that, because my plan dissolves the state of Illinois and its constitution. The pensions would be divided up amongst the 3 new states, and then each new state would decide itself what it wants to do. It could renegotiate its share of the pensions, and it would start its new life as a new state with a better financial situation than what we've got now.
But on the pension issue, obviously renegotiation is something a lot of people are talking about. With the creation of 3 new states, wouldn't that create a triplicate of bureaucracy?
Well, you would have to have, three governors, but see, our money is not going. The problem is our money is not going for people who are doing work. Our money is going to people who are not working at all. we're getting a pension, and that's where the problem is. I mean, and each new state is smaller, by the way. You don't need as many police, you don't need as many, you know, it would be divided up. So it wouldn't be completely triplicated. You don't need as many people with a smaller state. I mean, it's the people working they're not the problem. It's the problem with people who are not working. That's the problem.
And even in the event that this proposal did not go forward, do you think, and of course you've spoken out against tax increases, what's your projected revenue for your the expanded marijuana and the expanded gambling? What projected revenues do you have from that area? Because of course, without the new taxes, which can create a large amount of revenue very quickly, these other proposals would need to offset that for your plan to be competitive with other plans in terms of revenue. So I was just wondering.
Well, each one that would generate billions of dollars over the years. Just extrapolating from Colorado, it'd probably be for marijuana be $1 or $2 billion a year in new revenue. All the, you know, this local, state, county. I mean, there's many taxes that could be put on it, you know. And then the casino gambling would be probably $1 billion a year. So that would, you know, finance an awful lot of things.
All right, and on your tax proposal, I have your press release here that you're saying we don't need a graduated income tax. For our viewers, what specifically is a graduated income tax compared with what we have now?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Well, the graduated income tax is your income goes up, your percentage goes up too. And then that's what the federal government has, first of all. If you want to understand what a graduated income tax is, that's what the IRS has, you know, in Washington. So if you like the IRS, you'll like Mr. Pritzker's and Senator Biss's graduated income tax. And the thing I don't like about it is that it punishes hard work, in my opinion. I mean, how do people get up in these higher brackets, like 100,000 a year, or 80,000, or 150, or 200,000? They get there by working pretty hard, usually by working more than 40 hours a week. You know, like 50 or 60 if you're a mom and pop store, or a farmer, or a businessman, or professional person. Usually you get up in these higher areas by working more than 40 hours a week. That's the big secret, you know. So now Mr. Pritzker and Mr. Biss are going to come to you and say, well, I know you're working real hard and you're going to have to pay a higher percentage because you're making more. You're punishing work. You're punishing hard work and hard, you know, and that's not right. I think we should just keep the tax flat like it is. Actually, I'd like to lower it back down to what it was, but we may not be able to do that because of all our bills. In this press release, there's 12 reasons why I am against the graduated income tax. Here's one that people don't talk about. Governments that have graduated income taxes require an increasing amount of power over the years, over the decades, because everybody's salary goes up, you know, with time. So that means their percentage goes up too. And the government gets more and more and more money, and the federal government is the best example. So the federal government, or any government, acquires enormous amounts of power over the years, over the decades, more than most people would like. So that's another reason. Another thing about the tax, it takes money out of local economies and sends it to Springfield. And then who's down in Springfield to get all that money? Mike Madigan. So do you really want that? Most people probably wouldn't want that. So I mean, there's many other reasons too. It will not result in a decreased property taxes. It never has. They say, oh, millionaires and billionaires will pay more. They pay more anyway with a flat tax, but a lot of these millionaires and billionaires have their money hidden away. I don't know where, but I'm not a millionaire, so I don't know. But there's been many articles on it. They have it in as trust funds or in Caribbean banks or whatever the heck it is. So they can hide all their money. Most people can't. You know, I can. You can. So the idea that the millionaires and billionaires are going to pay more, I don't really believe.
And going back to your triple state proposal, or
Mhm.
if you have a different slogan for it,
I don't have any slogan, but go ahead.
is the issue with the minimum wage. One of the key issues that people have talked about, the difference between upstate and downstate, is that the cost of living in Chicago is much higher. How does that play into a minimum wage debate for you?
Well, that's another good advantage of this. Chicago will be its own state, and they could have their own minimum wage. And why should their minimum wage be affected down here, and vice versa? Why should your minimum wage down here have an effect up there in Chicago? They really should be separate. So I mean, you're right. Their minimum wage will be higher up there, and less down here.
And I guess before the break, you said you were a radiologist.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that. What I do is I diagnose disease with radiology, with CAT scans and MRs and ultrasound. I diagnose disease. I don't do any treatment. A lot of people think a radiologist is a person who is a radiotherapist. That's really separate. I'm basically a doctor's doctor. I take the x-rays and whatever and get a diagnosis and then give that to the doctor and he does the treatment. So I'm sort of a doctor's doctor.
All right, so you're sort of that first line of diagnostician,
right,
using radiotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and on your marijuana plan, there's been a lot of talk of sort of expanding access to marijuana in the state, and there's several compelling arguments for that. But at the same time, we have an opioid crisis that the federal government's identified, local governments have identified, which really seems to be pushing back against drug access. So I guess those two policies seem to me to be in some ways at odds with one another. How do you balance those two sort of competing objectives?
Well, there's some evidence that if you legalize marijuana, your opioid use and deaths go down a little bit. I don't know if most people know that, but they tend to smoke more rather than taking the opioids. The opioid, they're really a separate issue, a separate problem, really. Marijuana and the opioids. So we should treat them different. They're really entirely separate, and we know we can legalize marijuana. Many states have done it. It can be done, and what to do about the opioid problem is much more difficult, much more severe, and I don't believe anybody tells you they've got the solution. In general, we have to identify the addicts and treat them more like patients rather than criminals. You have to have more treatment and more maintenance of their drug, because they will go into a life of crime if they don't get their drug. We all know that, So you want to prevent that, and then there's all the medical complications too. So you want to, and death. You want to prevent that too. So, and that's the only way to do it, is to treat them like patients rather than criminals.
That's a really, really good point. And on that note, we do need to take a quick commercial break.
Mm-hmm.
When we come back, I have more specific questions about your work in Springfield and what makes you the candidate for the job.
Okay.
Welcome back. This is Springfield Daily Radio. My guest today is Dr. Robert Marshall, who's running in the Democratic primary for governor. Thank you so much for being here. And before the break, you mentioned... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Before the break, you mentioned Mike Madigan on a couple of occasions. And one of the key questions people have been asking is the relationship with Mike Madigan. Would you be able to work with Mike Madigan? So just give me your thoughts on the man as a speaker and as a professional.
Well, he's a very powerful person, and I think he favors Chicago in the upstate area. In my opinion, the downstate people get second shrift, in my opinion, and I'm up there. So I think I can work with him though. I mean, I'm the governor. I don't have to work in the legislature with him, by the way. I think I have to work with him. I think I could work with him better than Rauner, that's for sure. I mean, we have no place to go but up from that situation. But I think my plan, by the way, of dividing the states up, he would go back to Chicago, you know, and live happily ever after. You would have your own leaders down here.
All right, and there's been a proposal in the state legislature about a $107 billion bond deal where they would sell those bonds and invest that money back into the pension fund in a plan that's similar to the $6 billion we already spent to pay down some of the backlog of bills. Do you think that's too much? Do you think that's a good approach, or do you think that's not even on the right track at all?
Well, it's an enormous amount of money. That's 3 years of budgets. You know that? It's 107 billion, whatever it is. That's all the money we spend for 3 years. And look how much trouble we've had with the budget just for 1 year. You know, the pensions have to be renegotiated. That's what we need to do. They're not underfunded, they're overpromised, in my opinion. And I would try to do anything other than this solution here. That's $107 billion of debt, you know.
No, I mean, people have gotten wide-eyed at that number every time it's come up.
Just think of it this way: it's 3 years of budgets. It's 3 years. What we spend in 3 years, you're going to wrap it up into one thing, just for pensions, by the way. The average Joe Doe, he won't get anything. He won't get better roads, better schools, better anything. It's all for pensions. So Joe Doe won't get anything except higher taxes. You know,
All right, and last year we became a sanctuary state with the Trust Act, which limited local law enforcement's ability to coordinate with federal immigration authorities. How do you feel about that?
I'm a supporter of the Trust Act. I mean, the federal government has its own, there's plenty of power, plenty of people to enforce its own laws. In general, I'm strongly in favor of immigrants coming here. I mean, they've built this country and this state up, you know, especially up in where I live. So I'm in favor of the DACA program, and I'm in favor of the Trust Act. And we shouldn't, we need these people. It's simple as that. You know, I'm in medicine, for example, and we need a lot of technical people, you know, administrative people, doctors, nurses. We need these people.
And how do you feel about the Invest in Kids Act, which was the plan to give tax credits to fund scholarships to private schools?
Yeah, that's another thing I'm for, and I think I may be the only one. Some people say, well, that takes money away from public schools, but I don't think the way it's being doing that, the way they're doing it now is not, it won't do that. It encourages people to invest in schools on their own, I mean, with their own money. It wouldn't take money from the public coffers. So the total amount of money going into education would increase, number one, and I'm all in favor in general more competition, increasing competition. And I think this would increase competition between the private and public schools.
All right, well, competition's actually my next question, because there are a lot of people running for governor this year. And they come from a lot of different backgrounds. What makes you the standout candidate in that very crowded field?
Well, there's several things. First of all, I'm not a millionaire or billionaire. I'm more like an average person, so I think I can associate better with the average person. I think I can appeal to the whole state, not just Chicago or just one area. This plan of breaking up the state appeals to a lot of people down here. My stance on taxes, I'm a gun owner, remember NRA, that appeals to people, many people throughout the state. I'm from the suburbs, I live in the suburbs up there, so that and my plans on property taxes appeals to people there. And then my plans for Chicago would help Chicago a lot. So I appeal to all parts of the state. I think I can win better because I don't have any gigantic negatives. I know my phone has never been tapped by the FBI. I don't have any billions of dollars hidden away somewhere in some Caribbean bank. So I think all those things together make me a better candidate for the whole state and a candidate who can win better.
All right. On your triple state proposal, who gets to be Illinois?
Well, we talked about that. Well, that's the whole point. You get to decide yourself what your new state is, what the name is, what the capital is, what the new constitution. That's you. You're going to do that. That's your new state. And I won't be living in this one down here. I'll be up, I'll be up there somewhere. But you name it what you want. You could name it Lincoln Land. You could name it whatever you want. South Illinois. That would be South Illinois, or South Illinois would be sort of the obvious thing.
All right. And is there any other proposal? You've got a lot of sort of unusual ideas, sort of unorthodox ideas. Is there anything else you want to drop before my last question?
There's a lot of other issues that don't get talked about. Timeshare condominiums. You know much about that?
I know they tell me not to buy them.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of elderly people have been victimized by that. I think something should be done about that. Rent control. That's a new big issue, by the way, up in Chicago. I'm opposed to that. I live in New York City. Rent control is not good on a long basis. Here's a big issue: the lottery money. That's one of the most common complaints I hear is in all the years. People ask, what happened to the lottery money?
But what did happen to
Well,
the
the politicians use it for pensions and salaries, basically. What I would do with the lottery money is the same thing I would do with the marijuana money. You rebate it directly back to the citizens so they can see how much they're getting. And it should be done for each child of school age. Each child gets a check in July or August, and what are they doing then? They're buying school stuff, right? The money should be divided up equally, and each child of school age gets a check from the lottery money directly instead of going to the politicians.
With the Cover All Kids Act, which includes undocumented children, would you include undocumented children in your school funding?
Well, you have to. Yeah, they go to school, so we have to. Yeah.
All right, and no, there's a lot of issues, and my last question is: primaries have very low turnout typically. What would you say, not to a hardcore Democrat, not to your base, but what would you say to a moderate or an independent who's maybe not thinking the primary is for them, that they shouldn't pull that? Why should they pull that Democrat ballot?
Well, for democracy to work, it has, you have to come out. There is one big issue, by the way, in Cook County, which maybe will help the turnout. On the ballot in Cook County, there's going to be a choice to legalize marijuana. I don't know if you knew that or not. It's just advisory, but that's going to be, I think that's a big issue, and I don't know how many Cook County listeners you have, but that's a chance of a lifetime to actually legalize marijuana in Cook County. So hopefully that'll really bring people out.
No, well, thank you so much. My guest today was Dr. Robert Marshall, and your primary date is?
March 20th.
March 20th. So thank you so much for being here. And this has been Thomas Clatterbuck for Springfield Daily Radio.